afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the City of Santa Barbara Planning Commission meeting for April 15th, 2021. If we have the commissioners come online, please, I'm going to ask staff, members of the public, if they can participate in a comment today through electronic participation.
Thank you, Chair Schwartz. For the public, if you would like to make a public comment, please click the raise lower hand icon on the control panel, and this will notify me that you would like to speak. You will have 2 minutes to speak. You only need to click the raise hand button once, and a red arrow pointed down means that your hand is raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Busk. Now we'll go to roll call and ask Ms. Fennessy to join us and do a voice roll call.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I will now begin the roll call. Chair Schwartz.
Here.
Vice Chair Escobedo.
Here.
Commissioner Bonderson.
Here.
Commissioner Higgins. Absent. Commissioner Lodge.
Here.
Commissioner Reed.
Here.
And Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. And Commissioner Higgins did notify me in advance that he would be absent today. Very good. Now we'll go to preliminary matters. Ms. DeBusk, to the first item. Do we have any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of X agenda items?
Madam Chair, we have none.
Do we have any announcements or appeals?
We do not.
Very good. We'll go right along to our next item, which is review, consideration, and action on both the March 4th Planning Commission minutes, and these are continued, and the April 1st Planning Commission meeting minutes. Would any of the commissioners like to comment on requested revisions to either of these documents as staff had previously provided to us? Commissioner Wiscombe, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did send out revisions to to my comments for April 1st, which I believe all the commissioners received. And I had one additional correction, which is really just a correction of language. And that's if you, in my revised commissioner comments under bullet point 4, it finds that the verbiage used within the plan's action, performance targets, etc. And it should be, instead of do not, it should be does not. So if we could make that additional correction, I would appreciate that.
Very good, thank you.
And just for the record, Madam Chair, I wanted to note on the written correspondence, I corrected that because I am not, and Dave Davis is not a member of the Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara. We were purely in advisory capacity. So that's why I amended that one. Thank you.
Great, thank you. On either of these meeting minutes, any revisions from any of the other commissioners? I know we're still learning how to do this online versus just verbally relaying the information to staff or sending in separate emails. So we continue to be on a learning curve there. Nothing else today for either of those? Okay, very good. Why don't we look to make a motion then that would also incorporate Commissioner Wiscombe's edits. And we can, if you'd like, we can take these together, March 4th and April 1st. I don't know that we need a separate motion necessarily. Commissioner Lodge, please.
Madam Chair, I move that the Planning Commission approve the minutes for April 1st and the March 31st and April 1st with the corrections as submitted by Commissioner Wiscombe.
Okay, that's March 4th and April 1st. Those are our two dates. Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Do we have a second to that? Commissioner Wiscombe is seconding that. Okay, any discussion on that motion? Okay, very good. Ms. Fennessy, would you please call a vote on those two items?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I will now begin a roll call vote. Vice Chair Escobedo,
Yes.
Commissioner Bonderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe,
Yes.
and Chair Schwartz.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. Now we'll ask Ms. DeBus to rejoin us. We'll see if there are any members of the public who would like to speak to us on items not on our agenda today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this time, we do not have any members of the public that have joined us on the webinar.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving right along, we're going to go to our one and only item today, and that's a discussion item. So commissioners, feel free to turn off your webcams if you like. We're going to ask staff, and I believe it's Ms. Swanson. There you are. Welcome, Ms. Swanson. You're going to make a, good afternoon. You're going to make a presentation to us today, and then we're going to have a discussion. Let me read this into the record. The Planning Commission is going to receive a training on zoning basics focused on setbacks, open space, in accordance with Titles 28 and 30 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code. Take it away, Ms. Swanson.
All right, good afternoon. Today we are going to talk about Zoning 101 in Santa Barbara. Specifically, we're going to focus on setbacks and open yard requirements. So what is zoning? Zoning covers a lot of regulations for development. As described in the memo accompanying this training, the Supreme Court has allowed local jurisdictions to regulate the kinds of topics that we see on the screen since the early 20th century. It's a balance between rights as a property owner and regulating consistency in a jurisdiction for a desired look and feel of a community. The most critical and basic thing that zoning regulates is uses. What uses are allowed where? The classic example is that you don't want a slaughterhouse next to a school for a lot of reasons. A few weeks ago, we talked about allowed uses and how the Santa Barbara Municipal Code allows for adjustments to allowed uses through performance standard permits and conditional use permits. Today, though, we're going to focus on setbacks and open yard. So let's imagine a very typical 50 by 100 lot. Setbacks are essentially an offset of property lines, with the important caveat that you start measuring setbacks at the edge of right-of-way, shown here in green. Now shown here in green? It's coming. There it is. Sometimes property lines extend into a street. In that case, anything in the right-of-way does not count towards a setback. In most cases, measuring setbacks starts at the back of sidewalks. Front setbacks, the offset from the front lot line, are typically bigger than interior setbacks, which are the offsets on all other property lines. Title 28, the Municipal Code for the Coastal Zone, includes rear setbacks as an additional development standard in some zones and overlay areas. In Title 30, the Municipal Code for the Inland Area, the interior setback standard applies to all property setbacks that aren't the front setback. So before we move on, it's important to understand that the diagram we're looking at is simply that. It's a diagram meant to convey an idea in the simplest terms possible. The reality is that those setbacks extend all the way to the property lines as we now see on the screen. This means that setbacks overlap. And if development is proposed in a particular area, like this back corner shown in light blue, multiple modifications may be required, one for each setback. So how do we determine setbacks? We determine them by zones, just like uses. A particular use in a particular zone can impact what setbacks are applicable, like a duplex in a commercial zone versus a store in a commercial zone. Looking at the Title 30 development standard table for single family residential, we can see that standard setbacks increase with the parcel size. RS 25 lots require a 25,000 square foot parcel and 30-foot front setbacks. RS 7.5, on the other hand, requires a 7,500 square foot parcel size and a 20-foot front setback. We see the same thing with interior setbacks. The larger lots have larger setbacks, in this case 10 feet versus 6 feet. Title 28 works the exact same way, as we can see from the screenshot of the Title 28 municipal code. It's just organized a bit differently. So what's the point? Why do we care about setbacks? The purpose of a setback is listed on the screen, but the real world application is that setbacks provide building relief between the right of way, that area between public and private property, and private development, as well as variation in the city. Remember, we do start measuring setbacks at the edge of right of way, so at the edge of that green bar. Many commercial zones have no setbacks for commercial development, and the property owner can build right up to the property line. In a commercial corridor or in a really dense city center, that's expected, and it's not quite a shock to the system for pedestrians. But treating commercial and residential areas of a community differently is widely considered good urban design. For residential uses on residentially zoned lots here in Santa Barbara, that sense of openness and light and air is considered important. That opportunity to be outside and engaged in your neighborhood, or personalizing that space with a garden or hedges for privacy, that's what makes a neighborhood. It also allows for articulation of the street. Some property owners may want to develop right up to the front setback. Some might want to be pulled back a bit more. This is where we start to see that balance of regulation and personalization. So while we've been talking about the front setback, interior setbacks are just as important, though their purpose is a bit different. Interior setbacks act as buffers between neighboring private property. Look at the difference between these neighbors here. The two houses at the bottom of the screen have a much greater distance between them than the top two. The two at the top have the minimum requirement, but it is considered enough to provide relief and emergency egress and walkways from the front to the back of the lot, among other things. For the record, corner lots function the same way, except two front setbacks are applicable, a primary and a secondary front setback. The primary front setback is typically determined to be the one that matches the house's address. So if this were our house, and the front door faced 2nd Street, and the house was addressed as a house on 2nd Street, this would be the primary front setback. Across the street, though, the front door faces 1st Street and is a house addressed as a 1st Street house. So this would be the primary front setback. Primary and secondary front setbacks have the same dimension requirement, meaning if the municipal code says a 30-foot front setback is applicable, it's applicable on both street frontages. Secondary front setbacks typically have more leniency in allowing encroachments, though. In both of these examples, the houses are either non-conforming to a front setback, either the primary or secondary front setback, or that construction was approved with a modification. Both Title 30 and Title 28 allow for some level of encroachment into setbacks for very specific things. I'm going to focus on Title 30 because all that information is very easily found in section 30.140.090. All of these allowable encroachments that we see on the screen have specific criteria, including maximum encroachment distances and the mandate that encroachments that only meet the minimum size required by building codes. Some have different rules for primary and secondary front setbacks. Many of these allowable encroachments, like 1st-story decks, require what's called a minor zoning exception. I like to think of a minor zoning exception as a mini modification. They're typically approved by the design review boards instead of the staff hearing officer, like a mod, in conjunction with the review of the overall project. If a proposal were to exceed the standards allowed, either just as an allowable encroachment or with a minor zoning exception, or MZE, a modification would be required to encroach into the setbacks. So now that we have the basics of setbacks in our brain, let's talk about another development standard that dictates where residential buildings are supposed to be and where they're not. Open yard. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's space on a lot that is open. The standard is only applicable to residential development, though, not commercial or manufacturing, any of those kinds of uses. For one of our sample single-family houses from before, the obvious place to designate open yard is in the rear yard. The standard requirement is 1,250 square feet of open yard. Scaled to this diagram, it looks like this. Of course, open yard has development standards of its own. In general, these are the standards for single and 2-unit development. As the name implies, open yard is meant to be open. There are allowable encroachments that we'll talk about in a moment. Open yard is meant for people, not cars, so you can't count areas for parking or driveways. It is meant to be easily accessible from the residence, not on a roof deck or something like that. The standard is a maximum height of 3 feet for decks and platforms for the area to be designated open yard. It doesn't have to be one continuous space of open yard, and it can be in multiple areas as long as the minimum dimensions are met. Generally, that standard is 20 by 20. But the open yard does need to be outside the front setback, and at least one 20 by 20 area needs to be outside the front yard. Open yard is allowed to be in interior setbacks, though. Looking back at our diagrammatic neighborhood here, we see how open yard can define development potential and meet the purposes of open yard that we see on the left side of the screen. We know our first lot meets open yard requirements. Our second lot also meets the requirement, but we can see that it's a tighter fit because of how the house is situated on the lot. The property owner does have the option to manipulate that open yard shape as long as the minimum dimensions are met. With our third lot, our basic configuration of open yard doesn't fit, but could we morph it? Here's the minimum 20 by 20 dimension. That's 400 square feet, so we'd need a little more than 3 of those squares. We can't even fit 1. A portion of open yard can be located in the front yard, but not the primary front setback. So we can't fit that third square or even 1 square in front or on the side of the house because of the minimum required dimensions. So this means that our third lot here is non-conforming to open yard requirements, which essentially means that additions on this house are limited to the side of the house instead of the rear without any kind of additional approvals like a minor zoning exception or a modification depending on the proposal. And what about multifamily? For this training, we will not be discussing AUD standards. We're only going to talk about standard multifamily residential developments. These non-AUD developments have both private and common open yard requirements. The common open yard requirement is 15% of the lot with minimum dimensions of 10 by 10. Private open yard requirements are determined by the unit's bedroom count and whether it's on the ground floor or an upper floor. So let's assume that this apartment complex here has 3 ground floor studio units. Each one would be required to have 100 square feet of open yard with minimum 10 by 10 dimensions. Private open yards have requirements that they be screened with fences or hedges to maintain that privacy. But design review boards can waive that requirement depending on the proposal and if it's appropriate. Private open yards can also be configured to overlap with the common open yard requirement. And again, that does require design review. Otherwise, the same development standards such as open to the sky and not being located in parking areas apply to multi-residential developments just the same as single and 2-unit residential development. Like with setbacks, both Title 30 and Title 28 allow for some level of encroachment into open yard for very specific things. These items are all very specifically listed in Title 30. The basic development standard is that only 20% of open yard can be covered with these types of amenities. If a proposal were to exceed those standards, a modification would be required to encroach into designated open yard. In addition to the specific setback and open yard encroachments we've already seen, there are general encroachments that are allowable in both setbacks and open yards. The most common one I see is architectural projections like eaves. Of course, there are standards specific to each of these allowable encroachments, and if a proposal exceeds those criteria, a modification is required. So speaking of modifications, in putting this PowerPoint together, I reviewed all the modifications that I've processed at the city. We do not have cumulative information about total modifications at the city, but this is a good snapshot of modifications from the past 3 years from one case planner. And what were the most common mod requests I processed? Open yard and setback issues accounted for 89% of the modifications that I processed. A modification might mean that a proposal would overdevelop a site, but as we saw earlier, nonconformities and patterns of development might make a modification necessary to do basically anything on a lot. We can see here that multiple modification requests on one proposal is fairly uncommon. Nearly 90% of mod applications that I've processed were either for one or two modifications in a single proposal. And guess what? Essentially any multiple mod application typically encompassed an open yard and a setback mod. And that is the end of my presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Swanson. I'm really pleased that this is coming to us. We've had a number of kind of mini trainings on our list that have been rolling over for at least a year now. So very much appreciate you being here with us today. Mr. Buss, do we have any members of the public who would like to speak to us? And if so, let's pause and ask the planning commissioners to turn their webcams back on so that the public can see all of us today.
Thank you, Chair Schwartz. For the public, if you would like to make a comment, please click the raise lower hand icon on the control panel, and I will let you know when it's your turn to speak, and you will have 2 minutes to speak. The red arrow pointed down indicates that your hand is raised. So I will give it just another moment. Currently, no one has raised their hand to speak. And while we wait, Ms. Fennessy, did we receive any public comment on this item?
We did not receive any written correspondence for this item. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do not have any hands raised to make a comment on this item.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Busk. Okay, questions for Ms. Swanson or really any of the staff? Commissioner Wiscombe, please, let's kick us off.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really just have one question. In my years on Parks and Recreation Commission and then on Planning Commission now, the front setback is not well known with respect to our removal of trees. That requires a permit to remove a tree in a front setback. And I'm just wondering, Ms. Swanson, if you, how do you handle that? How do you handle that with applicants and just getting out to the public? I think there's a lot of people out there that don't understand, well, the tree is on my property. Why is it regulated by the city? So I'm just wondering if there's a way that can be conveyed to the public, what you're doing now, and if it can better be conveyed to the public.
Sure. So I agree that a lot of people don't seem to know that that's a rule. We do get many enforcement cases about that. And so then people retroactively do get those parks and recreation permits. And sometimes it involves planting another tree on their lot, or sometimes it would involve adding a street tree in their neighborhood, something like that, as abatement. But in regards to proposals, we are reviewing landscape plans when projects come in and looking for any proposed tree removal as part of that application, and then informing them that I understand you're going through the design review process and you're going through to get this approval, but you actually also need an approval from the Parks Department. And so it's a bit more responding to them coming in than us going out, in my experience.
Great. Okay, that's a great answer. I would just, I would love a way for us to get that information out to the community in any way we can, that, you know, we sometimes have trees cut down that are in front setbacks, and, you know, it's, you know, mitigation is planting another tree, but it, you know, it's not, it's, the impact is already gone. Mr. Busk is nodding her head.
Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Wiscombe, just one other plug, I suppose, is that the Planning Division does have a handout that's basically a worksheet that the public can walk through. Front setbacks is one of the key, as you said, areas that people don't know that the trees are regulated. But also if you're in a coastal zone, your tree may be regulated. And there are other, if you have an approved landscape plan, there are a couple reasons that may require you to get a permit. And so this worksheet will help the public. They can walk through it and figure out what process might be required.
Okay, and so are we relying then, I know that there's community members that are very well aware of the regulation of front setback trees. So are we continuing to rely on the public for properties that have already been developed where, you know, this, I know this isn't quite the subject we're talking about, but in terms of regulation of trees, I know that, you know, people have reported seeing, you know, they're starting to cut down a tree, and, you know, we need to stop it before it, if it's in the front setback. So is that a method that we're using also still?
Commissioner Wiscombe, yes, people can always call that in, although oftentimes that is too late, as you know.
Right. Yes.
So yes, just getting that word out that street trees and front setback trees are regulated, absolutely. And if anyone has a question, they can ask the planning counter and we can help them with that.
Okay, I wanted to bring that up, Madam Chair, at this meeting, just because I think if any of the public is listening, it's good to remind them that the front setback trees are regulated. So thank you for that. That's really my only question. It was an excellent presentation, Ms. Swanson. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff, either Ms. Swanson, Ms. DeBusk, on the materials, or anything that comes to mind on these two particular areas of zoning? Please, Commissioner Bonderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Ms. Swanson. Nice to see you again. I have a question just to perhaps provide some clarity. It's something that I come across from my side of the counter quite often, and it has to do with open yards. And I know with open yards, we have good direction, but there's always lots of different ways of solving the problem. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind going back to your final slide. I thought it was a very good slide, and the information that you provided was very straightforward. And it left me with one of those, but what if questions. I thought we could just talk about together and perhaps provide anyone who might be listening with more understanding of how we could come to a solution on how to handle it. It's the slide that had the 3 properties, and the third lot had the small, there it is, that's it. You mentioned when you were explaining the options that we would likely need 3 of those. I think you said it was 100 square feet. Was that the number you used?
Commissioner Bonderson, this is a representative of a 20 by 20 square, so that's 400 square feet.
Excellent, thank you. And do I remember correctly? You said to be able to achieve the open yard, you would need 3 of those?
You need roughly 3. You need 1,250 square feet if your lot is, off the top of my head, I want to say 5,000 square feet or bigger. If it's less than that, it's a lesser open yard requirement, but most lots, it's a 1,250 square foot requirement. So in this example, they can probably get 1,250, but it doesn't meet the dimension requirements, so it's still considered non-conforming.
That's actually exactly what I wanted to have you develop further for just a moment. The dimension requirements. Does that mean that the dimension requirements has to be a perfect square, or could we use the space in the rear setback to accommodate part of the remaining requirement?
So it's a two-part answer. So you absolutely can use setbacks to meet your open yard requirement, but not your primary front setback and not the first 10 feet of your secondary front setback. In this case,
and
we've only got the one. So we can essentially draw a line at that front setback and say you can't count any of that, no matter what. But then we start looking at what we have left on the lot. And I scaled these to be 6 foot interior setbacks because I'm a nerd. But so it's roughly, let's say that's 12 feet between the edge of the property and the edge of the house. So that doesn't meet that 20 by 20 requirement, but you could count that as your non-conforming open yard just to get to 1250. But by designating that area as non-conforming open yard, whenever you go to want to do an addition, you're probably going to be encroaching into non-conforming open yard and need a mod.
Excellent. And that answers my question, because it's, from what I heard you say, is yes, we could use it and it would potentially solve the problem we're trying to solve today in this moment, but in the future, if something new wanted to be planned and permitted on the property, it would create new limitations and it may require a mod. Did I understand that right?
Right. And so one issue I see a lot in building permit plan check is somebody will say, oh, I have this giant lot. Look, here's 5,000 square feet of open yard. And so I tell them it's in your best interest to actually only show the 1250. You don't want to designate open yard that isn't required because it could affect you later. And if in the instance of our second house there, if we were using the same open yard form as the first house, we're designating open yard right up to the edge of this house. But when we use this morphed version that we see here, it's still the 1250, but it's showing that you have more development potential on the lot.
These examples were easy for me to understand, and I really appreciate how you explained it. I think you did a very good job on this presentation, and I would love to see your notes. But I don't know if that's something that you could share with us, but I just felt that it was very well explained, and I want to commend you. Thank you for your presentation.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonderson. Vice Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Lodge, any questions for staff at this time?
I have one question. Thank you, Ms. Monson, for the presentation. I'm just curious, what are the impacts of an ADU on open yard requirements, and does it have an impact?
So ADUs are a whole other ballgame. The second an ADU is in play, we go to the ADU code section, and it does outline that you're allowed to count different things as open yard that you wouldn't typically be allowed to count, and also that the square footage and the dimension requirement is different. So we didn't get into that. I gave the caveat earlier that we weren't going to talk about AUD. I should have also said we're not going to talk about ADUs because it's a totally different can of worms. But yes, the requirements are different.
Okay, so I guess a follow-up question, it's okay if the answer is this isn't the proper time to ask, but so someone submits an application for an ADU, they plan on building one. They're not applying for an open yard modification, are they? Or it's all dependent on, I guess, what's found in the ADU?
So they might need an open yard modification if they don't meet the standards that are outlined in the ADU section of the ordinance, but they don't necessarily, it's not as if to get an ADU, you have to have an open yard modification. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. That answers my question perfectly. Thank you so much. That was my only question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Escobedo. I'll see if Commissioner Reed has any questions for staff. before I go to a couple of questions I have.
Nope, Chair Schwartz, no questions
Okay.
at the moment.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Swanson.
Okay, let me pause for a moment just to see if any other webcams come on. Well, I'll go to, I think I have two questions for you, Ms. Swanson. And thank you again. And by the way, I thought it was very interesting to see that in 1908, Los Angeles adopted the country's first municipal zoning ordinance. So that was just an interesting tidbit. Let's see, you had a slide, I didn't note the number, which slide it was, where you talk about multi-unit family zoning. Can we go back to that slide? So you say we're not talking about AUD, but multifamily residential is multi-unit family residential. It is that. So I'm wondering, since we have zoning in conjunction with a multi-unit residential housing policy, why you say that we're not discussing current policy pertaining to that relative to open yard? It's a little confusing for me in terms of that statement that you made.
So Chair Schwartz, the AUD ordinance does have different standards for open yard, and they have, for instance, an alternative open yard that I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but it's about the square footage of the lot, and it's just different than just the absolute standard multifamily residential. Allison may have it in front of her.
I actually don't have it in front of me, but the other complication with the AUD is that there's different standards for different parts of the city. Well, actually, we had considered, as you may recall, different standards for the central business district. And the reason that AUD has such different standards is partly because you may recall AUD was adopted before we adopted Title 30. And then when we adopted Title 30, we changed the open yard standards a little bit. And there was concern that with changing those AUD standards, because people expected certain things. So that's why we ended up with these multiple standards, not only multiple standards, but then, as Ms. Swanson said, an alternative to the standard. So there are multiple ways to do it. And just for simplicity and explanation to the public, that's why we didn't get into that. But the concepts are entirely the same, right? It's just that dimensions or different things like that are different.
Okay. Then at the beginning of your presentation, sort of the general context description or explanation, Ms. Swanson, you referenced, let me just see, I made a few notes. You mentioned the difference between residential zoning and commercial zoning. Commercial zoning, I don't know if you have this on in an early slide, even in a bullet point format in terms of the setback differentiation. And I was thinking that maybe it's not quite that clear cut, because where we allow residential development in highly commercialized corridors, not only in our city, but in many American cities, and certainly even international cities, what you find in an urban core are either very small setbacks or no setbacks required for dense residential development, not just commercial. So I wasn't quite, unless I misunderstand what you said, I wasn't quite synchronizing with me in terms of what I thought I heard you trying to describe as sort of clear differentiation between residential and commercial, where we allow both, and urban core versus outlying neighborhoods differentiation. Can you just talk to us a little bit about that, if my questions and my observation make sense to you?
Sorry, I was muted there. Okay, so I just pulled up our municipal code for Title 30, and I'm looking at commercial zones. And for instance, I'm looking at the OR and OM zone. And when they talk about a front setback for non-residential and mixed use, they give a standard setback of 10 feet. But if it's purely residential, it says same as RM zone. And then we have to back up. So hold on, that'll just take me a moment. RM, which in this case is actually also 10. But it might not be though. You know, it could be a situation where for commercial, they say that the front setback is 0 if it's commercial or mixed use. But if it's just residential, then it's 10. So it is possible that residential development would have a 0 setback if it was part of a mixed use development. But if it was just residential, it would be a different front setback for our code. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Here's what I'm thinking through in terms of our own city's development, which is not unlike many American cities at various points in our country's history. Santa Barbara starts, over 100 years ago, plus, where we have residential and commercial all downtown, residential above commercial, no setbacks. That's how our town started, again, like many towns. And so we have a long history of residential and commercial combined in our core. I'll just call it our core, our downtown area. The artificial zoning that's created, which is really, it is an artifice. I mean, the actual development occurs because that's what community needs, wants. Kind of leaves me asking you, I don't know if this is more of a question of trending changes in zoning for modern communities, modernizing cities that are older but need to find their way into the future, just in terms of anything you might have to share where mixed use, converting some commercial to residential might look differently in terms of just the two categories of zoning you're talking about today, which are open space and setbacks. Do you have any thoughts at all for me on that? And if not, that's fine. I just thought since we're here together today and you see this day in and day out in your role, maybe you have some thoughts about that.
I think it's a moving target. I mean, we do those kinds of design charrettes and hear what people are wanting to do in our town, and we take that under advisement. You know, our long-range planning is looking into FAR developments, and that's more of a form-based code idea. But we did just see not too long ago, I'm trying to remember the address. It's right next to the Arlington. It was a project above Opal Restaurant where they converted commercial space to 2 residential units.
Yes, that came to Planning Commission. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that project needed a parking modification and an open yard modification. It didn't need a setback modification because it was mixed use and it fell into a 0 setback. So while they were converting commercial to a residential use, that was fine in regards to setbacks because it was part of a mixed use development. But they were situated in such a way that they couldn't have open yard. In that case, they were a historic building and they were already built lot line to lot line. So what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to blow up part of the building to park a car there and have a garden? Or do we leave it there and say that modification is an appropriate improvement on the lot and therefore supportable, which is what the Planning Commission ended up doing. So we do see these kinds of projects, and I think the more we see these kinds of projects, the more things will change. But I think it's going to come from the private sector saying, this is what our clients are wanting.
And then lastly, thank you so much. Very well put, Ms. Swanson. I don't remember if it was your very first slide. Can we go back to the beginning of your PowerPoint where you have a list of zoning categories? Yeah, what is zoning? There we go. I wanted to ask staff if you would please consider, so this is kind of a look ahead. What I don't see on here, and you can tell me if you think this just belongs in a wholly other kind of subject matter to be addressed with Planning Commission in a mini training, specific plans, development plans, and planned unit developments. And I don't know if you consider PUD on that same list as development plan and specific plans. Of course, specific plans and development plans are not a regular kind of common part of review and determination, Planning Commission, Council. But therefore, because they're not as common, they're not well understood. And I would like to see those added to the list. And again, I'll let staff, decide your discretion where you think they fit, but they're more complex and especially on the specific plan side, have often broader implications for community planning, neighborhood planning, community planning, urban development. So if I could ask you to do that, I think there would be an interest in that. So that's it from me. Commissioners, any particular thoughts about setbacks, open yard, zoning, even what you may like to see staff bring forward? I just kind of jumped in and mentioned a couple of things that have been on my list for a few years. Commissioner Wiscombe, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think your idea is very good. I also just wanted to make a request. I think Commissioner Bonderson alluded to it. I think as a planning commission could benefit from having this PowerPoint sent to us. So if that's possible, that would be my request. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Anything else, Commissioner Wiscombe, you would like to see on this list? Because I think it's going to be a rolling list, and I'll be working, Vice Chair Escobedo and I will be working with staff to prioritize bringing these mini changes. I mean, until we go back in person together in room 15, we're going to fold them into our 1 o'clock hearings.
I think you have a good start. I'll give it, you presented some food for thought. So if I have anything else, I'll certainly be happy to add it to the list. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Lodge, thoughts?
I just wanted to second Commissioner Wiscombe's request for the PowerPoint. I would also like to have it.
Yes, I think we would all benefit from it. Thank you. Other commissioners, Vice Chair Escobedo, any thoughts on this or any other zoning training, since we have staff with us now, that you might like to see prioritized in the coming weeks or months? I'll wait a few minutes. I don't see any webcams on, but there's no hurry. Or comments to staff in general? Is everybody there? Sorry, a little bit of levity in the afternoon here. Commissioner Bonderson, your webcam is a little fuzzy. I wanted to see if you could turn it off and turn it back on to see if that clears it up. It's kind of fading in and out a bit.
If you'd like to give me a moment, I can log off, log back on, and I'll probably have a more clear visual. And in the meantime, other commissioners can have their turn and I'll come back in. Is that okay?
Yes, excellent. I think that's good. It's unusually fuzzy today. That's not customary for you.
Yeah, let me fix that and I'll be right back with a comment. Thank you.
Okay, while we're waiting either for any other commissioners or Ms. DeBusk, if you have any thoughts or even questions of us about maybe what next to prioritize in terms of zoning training. Commissioner Lodge, did you have additional thoughts for staff?
Yes, I was thinking about last Tuesday's city council meeting where with questioning from council member Snedden, I finally figured out, understood how SBCAG makes the apportionment of the number of required dwelling units. And I think if we could have something similar, that would be helpful.
I agree. Miss DeBusk, I don't know if we need both Miss DeBusk and Miss Ostring, or probably Miss DeBusk. Do we have an opportunity to slide in sort of a mini discussion on the regional needs housing allocation in the next several months, perhaps?
Chair Schwartz, I will need to look at this schedule. I know we are going to have some pretty full agendas for the month of May, and it looks like the month of June as well. But I will take a look to see if there's an agenda that has a little bit of extra room where we could add something.
Or July would be excellent. You know, the next several months I think would be very helpful. Commissioner Wiscombe, additional thoughts, please?
Yeah, excuse me, I was just thinking we have a request to have I think it's our May 13th meeting start at noon. We could actually, since we're meeting online, we could actually maybe start our meetings at noon and do the lunch hour online and have some of these training sessions, if that's a possibility, Ms. DeBusk.
I will keep that in mind as we're looking at meeting dates.
Thank you.
And I've been asked and has spoken with Ms. DeBusk, now that we're getting vaccinated and we're moving in the right direction there, I've been asked if there is a date on the horizon when we'll be moving back into chambers at City Hall. And Ms. DeBusk has told me that there is no date either targeted or certain that we're going to be doing that. So we'll just need to continue to do our best in this virtual environment, kind of settle in for quite a number of months through this year, and make it the best possible. I don't know if Commissioner Bonderson is back with us to offer her comments. Any other commissioners want to offer your recommendations or requests on the next sequence of zoning trainings? Do you have any preferences? We could have that slide put back up from the PowerPoint. In fact, Mr. Bolton, if you would do that, please. That has the zoning, there we go. And then as you heard, I asked that specific plans, development plans, certainly those two be added to the list. Commissioner Bonderson, your thoughts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is this a better video? Did we fix the problem?
Not much, but you know, we're not going long today, so we'll figure it out on another day. It's okay. We'll just continue.
Well, it was worth a try. To answer your previous question, I don't know if you may have planted some new questions while I was gone, but I was interested in potentially following up with your question about what we may like to have more training on, and the training that would obviously be something that the public could go through with us would be wonderful. I had 3 in particular that I had requested a while back, and I'm sure that they are important to many boards as well as Planning Commission and to the public. One is just the obvious, city's average unit size density incentive program. Even though it's something we see all the time, I think it'd be really good to have a summarized training for us. California's state density bonus program, which happens to be California Government Code section, I'm going to read it just to be really clear what I'm hoping to see, is 65915-65918. and also the Streamlined Housing Project Program, which is California State Senate Bill 330. I'm curious because these three sort of go hand in hand a lot of the time when we are seeing AUD projects come up, and it's very challenging to understand one piece of the pie without the other two. If that is something that may be an option for us, I would love to have that type of training all put together so that we can really cross-reference and hopefully grow as a group. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and staff and I will add that to the list, and then perhaps Vice Chair Escobedo and I could have a go-to meeting with staff and review the expanded training list and discuss prioritizing and where we can start to slot some of these prioritized trainings in. I think it's really been unfortunate that we've not continued the mini trainings that we had for so many years, you know, lunch in room 15, and especially with the turnover of commissioners, I think for all of us to be working well together with a baseline of knowledge and having these tools is very important. So thank you so much. I'm adding those three things to our list, Commissioner Bonderson. Any other thoughts? Thank you. Any other thoughts from commissioners or Ms. DeBusk on this list and prioritizing? Did you want to say anything else before we move to kind of move away from this item and go to our last, which is our administrative agenda? Okay, very good. Then we're going to close this item. Thank you very much to Ms. Swanson and Ms. DeBusk for preparing for today. And commissioners, if you could come back on if you have any part of the administrative agenda to report out to us all. Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bolton, if you could bring up the slide that I sent to you for 410 State Street. This was yesterday's meeting of the Historic Landmarks Commission, was before them April 14th. And this is a proposal to build, as you can see, a climbing gym in the former Staples space for the additional height that they need, starting about 100 feet back from the front of the store. They'll be going up to create the space that you see in the image on the left, about well, from 26 feet up to 45 feet, so that they have the space for greater height for people who want to learn how to climb. Thought it was an interesting reuse of or adaptive reuse of an existing property. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Let's go to any other committee liaison reports. Commissioner Reed, please.
I just had a question for Commissioner Lodge. I was curious, Commissioner Lodge, if that request is that a part of the housing project, part of the same application?
I don't think so. No, it's separate.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Very good. Are there any other liaison or committee reports that any of the commissioners would like to offer? Okay, seeing none. Staff, do you have anything in closing for us today? Because that would conclude our agenda.
Madam Chair, I don't have anything else.
Okay, very good. Commissioner Wiscombe, please.
I'm sorry, I forgot all about this, but the joint De La Guerra Plaza Revitalization Committee, Historics Landmark Commission joint meeting is scheduled for, and I don't have it on my calendar isn't up here, but it's scheduled for Friday, May 7th, if May 7th is a Friday. And it's from 1 to 4:30 for anyone that's
Very
interested.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting all of us know about that. That's going to be a very interesting joint meeting. Commissioner Higgins and I have a Highway 101 HOV design meeting next week, so we'll report out on that at the next Planning Commission hearing. And I don't see anything else from any of my colleagues. And that concludes our hearing today. We've covered everything. Thanks to everyone, and we are adjourned until next time. Stay well.